My name is Nadeem Haque. As you know, PID really likes to recognize all intellectual activity in Pakistan and try to arrange webinars on all intellectual activities so that we can all learn. My company really needs to learn together. From that point of view, I must say, I'm extremely happy to invite my good friend Shakil Durrani, who needs no introduction. He is one of our best, finest bureaucrats. Everybody knows him. He has यार अपने mics बंद करने जो भी नहीं बोलता because we now have begun the webinar. So Shakil Durrani Saab has worked in many different positions, very important positions, from Secretary Railway to WAPTA to many provinces. Shakil Durrani Saab, as I said, is one of the finest bureaucrats. A lot of respect for him all over the world. And I think this is a very welcome thing that Shakil Durrani has written a wonderful book describing his experiences, analyzing the civil service, summing up the areas summing up the issues in the frontier areas, in the tribal areas, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, etc. It's a wonderful addition to our knowledge. One could say that it's a deep anthropological, sociological study of the region, and I think it deserves a lot of attention and thought. So from that point of view, I thought it was very important to have Shakil Durrani Saab launch his book at the PIDE platform, because it's stuff like this that we really want to learn from and understand. Personally, I've learned a lot by reading this to understand how how those areas work, which I have never been to. So Shakil Saab, with that introduction, can I ask you to speak a little bit about your book, introducing it to the audience, and then we can go from there.
Thank you, sir. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Feel honored with my book being launched through PIDE. Let me begin by saying, why the book? So there were really two main reasons why I thought I should write. Firstly, I think this was an obligation to the family, to friends, to my service career. And I've been very fortunate. The Almighty has been very kind to me throughout. So there are lots of things which I thought I must put in print, because the younger generation, my children and my nephews and nieces and grandchildren and all these people, there are so many things I wanted them to know that were it not to be brought out in print, maybe in a few years' time, no one would know. For example, my children would never know that one of my cousins, a girl, was half Russian, and she joined the Russian Air Force during World War II and was a tail gunner in a Soviet bomber. Her younger sister was soprano in an opera. That's my first cousin. And of course, there's no contact with them any longer, but there are dozens of anecdotes. Actually, this book is light reading, and there are dozens and dozens of anecdotes, but there are morals to the story also. So I thought I'll record these things. And then I thought that there is an obligation to the society, to the country, to record what I've seen. And to the best of my knowledge, I've tried to be very, very truthful, presented things the way I saw them. Now, of course, this comes with a caveat, because lots of people feel, and they are justified to a large extent also, they say bureaucrats, after their retirement, choose to write books and pontificate. But when they are in service, they behave arrogantly, and their response to the needs of the people is not very forthcoming. And I sort of agree with that statement, to quite an extent, because if there is anyone who's let this country down, it's the ruling politicians and the bureaucracy. Of course, there have been good politicians and there have been some very fine bureaucrats. And the country owes a lot to those who served with dedication. Now, but having said that, things remain pathetically poor in our dear country. Things which other countries, issues which the other countries have resolved long time back, we have been unable to do that. Can you imagine 74 years after independence, so to speak, the literacy ratio is less than 60%. And actually, in the last 2 years, 2 years back, it actually fell 2% in most of the country, most of the provinces. Now, how can we step into the 21st century with a literacy ratio of less than 60%? And literacy ratio in Pakistan is defined ludicrously. If you were to actually measure the real literacy ratio, maybe it will not be more than 25 or 30%. Secondly, one other issue which has been totally ignored ever since President Ayub left, and that's the high growth rate of population. Even today, the population is growing at about 2% a year. So can you imagine we are adding 5 million people to our population, 50 lakhs every year? And look at the conditions already. Look at the state of accommodation, the cost of the food, the congestion everywhere, the inability of the government to reach out to the common persons. And yet nothing, virtually nothing is being done as far as family planning is concerned. And I've seen in the last 30 or 40 years, and I've been Federal Secretary Population Welfare also, very little has been done as far as this is concerned. Now, how can you step into the 21st century and become an Asian tiger if the population growth rate is so high? Bangladesh has about a 1% growth, and it's falling even further. And ours is 2%. This is totally unsustainable. And there are issues of governance. There are issues of unemployment. What we really should have focused upon, we are still not focusing upon that. The emphasis still is general conventional universities teaching humanities and languages. So who's going to teach the vocation? Where would the vocational institutions come from? The professional, vocational, technical education. And we are taking a beating as far as that's concerned. And I've always thought, and I've wondered that in Pakistan, where are the leaders who lead their country to success, to high growth rate, and to progress? For example, where is our Deng Xiaoping? And where is our Xi Jinping? Where is our Dr. Mahathir Mohamad and Mr. Lee Kuan Yew? Where is our Dr. Manmohan Singh, our Turgut Özal, our General Park Chung-hee, our Erdogan? These people, apparently, it appears that we never had these people. These were visionaries. They took the bold decisions. Whereas here, we have seen the leadership, and especially over the last 30 years or 40 years, things have really been sad for the country. So anyone who would sort of wish that we moved ahead, things are not really happening. Our GDP growth rate, our per capita income is almost half of that of Bangladesh. $1,400 is a pittance. Bangladesh is much more than that. So unfortunately, the quality of leadership that was required and the role which the bureaucracy should have played has been wanting to a large extent in Pakistan. Now, let me say that over my career, I've seen some remarkable bureaucrats, exceptional people of integrity, intelligence, intellect, and courage. Now, over the years, somehow, I think the bureaucracy is being pressed down, pushed down, and even though the bureaucracy gets all the blame, the fact remains that this is not the bureaucracy which worked, let's say, 30, 40 or 50 years back. There's little security of tenure. You know, that famous example of the higher education department in the Punjab, 14 secretaries or 13 secretaries in a year. And that is all across the board. You know, there's deputy commissioners and ACs and DPOs and IGs and chief secretaries serving less than a year. Less than 2.5 to 3 years is just not tenable. You know, you just can't perform. And I think, and this really applies to a large number of political leaders also, that a frank, open discussion is frowned upon. It's not really encouraged. And more, there's a master-serf relationship between the political leader and the senior bureaucracy. And the senior bureaucrats, they have to keep mum because, as I said, there's no security of sanctity of tenure. And things get done in a manner which is not optimal, but things appear to be deteriorating. So all these things I have mentioned in the book in various chapters, but as I said, the first 100 pages, and this is about a 430-page book, the first 100 pages is really about me, myself, my family, my friends, my schools, my colleges, and some tales from the frontier, 20 tales from the frontier. Now, this is really, I wanted these to be placed in for posterity. And I've had, the book was launched by Oxford University Press, and I'm grateful to them for having sponsored it and published it. The Oxford University Press, Pakistan, they've been very kind to have done that because I understand that they just pick up one manuscript in 20 to publish or something like that. Now, the first 100 pages is, it's called A Frontiersman Recalls. So I'm recalling my school days, my college, university days, my years in the civil service, some postings, the transient tenures of the chief secretary. I was fortunate. I was chief secretary at 4 places, the KP, Azad Kashmir, Gilgit-Baltistan, and Sindh. And there were always problems. And one realized that it's difficult to function. It's getting increasingly difficult to function at the highest level because the ruling politician does not really appreciate honest, objective advice. And as I said earlier, increasingly there's a master-serf relationship. You say what you want to say, and they don't like it, so you get sacked. And actually, in 3 of these places where I was chief secretary, I was removed because I had serious differences with the government. The last one being in Karachi, following the 12th of May, 2007, when 48 people were killed, innocent people were killed, for no reason at all, just because the rulers then, both the provincial and the federal rulers, did not listen to my advice. And I wrote a letter to them in advance of this, that what you are leading to is going to have some very unsavory consequences. And 48 innocent people died, who were just street vendors or chokidars and things like that. So as I said, that they don't encourage that. And I have felt after my years in the service that it is not really intellect which is the most important component of being a good civil servant. Intellect is important, but that's less important than courage. Courage is supremely important. And by courage, I mean character, and courage, I think, essentially mean the same, so that you can speak truth to power. You know, that is difficult. That's the most difficult part of our career, because power does not like truth to be spoken to them. So that I thought was difficult, and I've quoted lots and lots of instances. You know, I had a long tenure in the water and power sector, the railways, the general administration. And again, it's light reading. There are so many anecdotes, and you'll be amazed at how casual the political leadership was and is in dealing with some of these problems. For instance, there's absolutely no reason that we are losing more than ₹1 billion a year, and now for almost 25 years. ₹1 billion a day is the loss of the power sector, because those decisions which ought to have been taken have not been taken. When WAPDA was bifurcated in 2007, October, it was thought that within 3 years, the discos would be privatized, or better still, leased out. And that's not happened. It's been 14 years since then. It's not happened because those who are in the control of the power sector would not let, because there's a lot of discretion in this, lots of power. Imagine the power sector alone employs something like 120,000 people. That's like 3 or 4 army corps. That's the number of people there are. And there's so much patronage in the power sector that I think one reason why they do not want to lease it out or privatize it, because of the patronage. Otherwise, there is a solution, and one part of the solution, of course, lies in privatizing that. Now, I just want to clarify that when I was chairman of WAPDA, that is when the power sector was separated. So my 5 years in WAPDA, I had nothing to do with the power sector. I was only looking after the water sector. So, since the losses in the power sector are so great, I think this was something that I thought I would mention. And I was, as a citizen of Pakistan, if not as a chairman, you know, it really pains you when you realize that, look at the extent of the circular debt, 2.3 trillion. It could have been managed better. The losses are there, and not much is being done about it. And these things, of course, they spread all over as far as this is concerned. So I thought that these were some of the issues which I raised. I have mentioned the tribal areas, now the merged areas, because I've spent a very long time in the tribal areas, right? As an assistant political agent commissioner, additional chief secretary. And I'm fascinated by the tribal areas. And I just love the tribesmen, you know, the sort of people that you associate with. And I've been associating with them in service officially for almost 12 to 15 years. And long after I left the tribal areas, you know, there are dozens of people, these tribesmen, in many cases, their sons and grandchildren who come and see me. So I think the tribal areas have been merged, which is the right decision. It ought to have been merged. The extension of the police to the tribal areas is the right decision. The Sartaj Aziz committee did the right thing by merging the tribal areas. And I think part of the time, Sardar Mehtab was the governor, and then Jagda was the governor. So this was the right decision, but I'm quite upset because presently there's a void as far as the judicial functions of the state are concerned. The judiciary, the Kacheri part of the judiciary, the lower courts, you know, they have been rather an abysmal failure over the past 150 years in Pakistan and India. and we have transferred these very civil judges and courts to the tribal areas. They didn't work out over here. They did a poor job over here. How would they do anything better over there? And the tribesmen are not very happy with that. I have written about it. Some of my articles have been published in the newspapers, but I hope the government looks into this, and the Criminal Procedure Code and the Civil Procedure Code, as practiced in the settled districts, is totally unworkable in the tribal areas. And I hope sooner or later they have the Rivaj procedural code. So tribal areas and merged areas, this is an important issue. I have mentioned something about what used to be called the provincially administered tribal areas, Dir, Swat, and Chitral. Now, I've spent a very long time in these areas, and I think some of the finest people that we have, and some of the excuse me, in Chitral, of course, was always my favorite posting. There's nothing like Chitral in the entire country, but Gilgit, Baltistan, Skardu, Gilgit, Hunza, lovely places. And so of course, are Dir, Swat, and Chitral. But they have their problems. And one of the problems is really the slow pace, the non-responsive government officials. The police stations are not doing a good job. The Patwar is doing a poor job. The courts take forever to decide cases, because in the old Wali of Swat days, there was hardly a case which was not decided within a week or 10 days or 15 days. Now, 15 years might be the standard time in which a civil case is disposed of. So I think we owe something to the people of the Malakan division, and more so to the people of the tribal areas, because no one in this country has suffered as much as the people of the tribal areas right from 1947-48, because they are the ones who sacrificed the most for this country. And I don't think we are doing a fair enough job for them. We need to look after their interests better. And it's sad that the recommendation that 3% of the divisible pool would be spent on the tribal areas for 10 years, that's not happening. Now, just reminisce and recall the suffering of the tribal areas, the number of the amount of blood and sacrifice these people have made right from 1979, or even before that, when the Soviets entered Afghanistan. So the past 40 years, they've had a very tough time. And I'm sorry to say that the tough time for them continues, and we are not providing we are not making the effort to develop them. But more than economic development, I think it's important that we reform and restructure the institutions, especially the judicial setup and the police setup. And the officials must all be made responsible, so that when you go to a police station, it's not the discretion of the police whether or not to lodge an FIR. It's their duty, it's their obligation. And this doesn't happen. This doesn't happen in the rest of the country, but this doesn't happen in the tribal areas either. So they resort to informal jargas and informal adjudication. But I hope that in the years to come, something improves. So these are some of the issues which I have raised. And there's a full chapter. I was Chief Secretary in Sindh on the 12th of May, 2007. And there's a chapter. And, I've seen what motivates the rulers. And it's not the good of the people that motivates. It's their own selfish interest that motivates. One other chapter, which is quite a favorite of mine, and that relates to wildlife. I've written extensively on wildlife. Wildlife has been decimated. Fortunately, the trophy hunting program has done well, and some forms of wildlife are improving. But I've written about the power brokers and given some suggestions for the future. And I hope people who read the book, I had some great response. The feedback has been tremendous from hundreds of people, but there'll be other hundreds of people who do not like it. But I have said what I wanted to say. And as I've quoted in the preface, I've quoted Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, who says that, I want to sing like the birds sing, not too worried about whether someone listens or what they think about it. I've written my book. I'm quite pleased with it. It pleases me. And I hope those who get to read it would like it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Shakil Sahab. It's a wonderful book. As I said, it's very rich, and I think some anthropologists, sociologists should do it justice. Shakil Sahab, you had an amazing career. I mean, quite frankly, it's enviable. You've been to so many places, you've done so many things. As a Pakistani, I think it's an enviable career, and it's a wonderful career. And you honestly recorded many of your thoughts and things. You've been very forthright. I do sense that you enjoyed your career, but there is a deep sense of despair, should I say. Or there's a kind of a sense of despair. For example, let me read out this to you. You say in your fond memories in one place, having spent half a century in public service, I left with the impression that these days it is rarely possible for an officer to positively influence policies where personal agendas of rulers are involved. Then again, you say in another place, most chief secretaries are not destined to complete their full tenures because of the unfair expectations of the rulers, who while others serve simply as doormats. Strong words, Shakil Sahab, and I see these everywhere. So let me ask you 2 or 3 simple questions. One, yeah, we sense the same despondency that all of us feel. I'm not holding you personally. I mean, we all have, whenever we sit together, there's a sense of despair, a sense of pessimism, because we all feel we are not going where our potential should lead us. So we are a people who kind of always have this feeling that we are performing under potential. But you place a lot of blame on the leaders. Now, there's also this other side of the coin that people talk about, that the civil service, for example, politicians, the civil servants don't work and they don't give us the necessary. So how do we solve this equation? Could the civil service, which is a powerful institution, not form some kind of a compact with the leaders on how to work? Or what is required to make the system work better? Because after all, we need a civil service. And as you said, I mean, personally, I know a lot of your civil servants our age are my friends, and they're all very competent people. I can't say a word to them in terms of their competence, but individual competence. The group somehow doesn't do so well. So how would you reply to that?
Dr. Nadeem, as I said earlier, I blame the bureaucracy, the civil servants, just as much, though I feel that since the laws and the directives primarily are issued by the politicians in power, right up to Ayub Khan, and even amazingly, surprisingly, some people might be surprised with General Ziaul Haque and with General Musharraf, one could speak one's mind. And we were a bit more fortunate in the frontier province, KP, that we could say what we wanted to Mir Abdul Khan or Aftab Sherpao and Sardar Mehtab, and get away with it. We would speak our minds, and they would not sort of take it ill. But then, and later on, and I'm speaking of the last 30 odd years, it's become very difficult to speak one's mind to the politicians. So that's why I said it's a master-serf relationship. And I've known all politicians, almost all politicians, the top 3 or 4 or 5 in every political party. I've known them and worked with them. And most of them, I think, have underperformed. There are some good people. But, it is really for the bureaucrats, and especially the senior ones, let's say grade 20 and above, and particularly for the federal secretaries, the chief secretaries, the IGs and all, that they speak their mind. So that's why I say that courage is much more important than intellect. No matter how brilliant you are, But if you just keep mum and the politician gets his way, things are not what they should be. Many people feel that our parliament has become largely irrelevant to the needs of the people. Our judiciary, the kachari part of it, our offices in the districts and the division and the tahsils really respond. And this what happened in Murray is just the latest incident. The responsiveness that ought to be there, one gets the feeling is not there. And of course, I'm quite convinced that there's very little accountability, none of the politicians and very little of the bureaucrats. But I agree with you. We also have to share the blame.
You also put the blame rightly on our value system. You say that for someone that for some time to come, our past reputation, even our personal present conduct, will unfortunately continue to haunt us, as we will only be able to shed our unhappy traits when those in the country who control matters decide to stand up to higher principles. You seem to also say that we deserve what we get. Is that a right interpretation? Is it a matter of our values, or has something happened to us? Are we responsible for what's happening to us?
So firstly, I feel that there's something in our DNA. For the last 3,000 years, the area which now forms Pakistan has been subjected to repeated invasions. And the loot, the blood, the pillage, the gore that these people suffered. So our natural response to the marauders and the invaders from Central Asia into what is now Pakistan, we couldn't stand up to them. So we just bowed before them. We prostrated to the force and to the power. And that unfortunately, that trait continues. So anyone who's in the government, everyone flocks to him. And anyone who's in the opposition, can you imagine that someone like Mohtarma Fatma Jinnah lost the elections because there was power on the other side. So I think this part of it is in our DNA. And again, because there is so much power and patronage for those in power, that it's difficult for people to resist them. So when you can't beat them, just join them. So I think that's what's happening. But then, of course, there are some very honorable people amongst the politicians who stick their neck out. And despite all that they suffer in terms of jail and beatings and whatever, they stand their ground. Now, it's not very easy. It's not very easy for opposition politicians to stand their ground, but some do it. And it's not very easy for senior bureaucrats to stand their ground, but some do it. So I think it'll be a long while. But as I said earlier, where are those leaders which developed Malaysia and Singapore and South Korea and Turkey and China? Somehow they have bypassed us. Just as they say that the current of civilization and skepticism, the current of skepticism and enlightenment bypassed much of the Muslim world. Somehow these things have also bypassed us. We find it difficult to speak our minds, but I think the hope is that in the years to come, things might improve. But as of now, with this miserable literacy ratio and a high growth of population and the devastation of the environment and our problem with water and the sort of leadership which doesn't really focus on these four or five issues that I've mentioned. If they were to do that, maybe there would be a ray of hope. But right now, I am a bit pessimistic about the future also.
Shakil साहब एक बात बताइए कि you're a very unusual civil servant. आपने अपना करियर, हमें जो आदत है सिविल सर्विस की कि वो चाहता है इस्लामाबाद में रहे, वो चाहता है लाहौर में रहे. आपने माशाल्लाह you spent your life in the far outlying regions, जहाँ को कोई नहीं जान सकता था, जहाँ कोई पार्टी नहीं हो सकती थी, कुछ नहीं. तो एक तो पहले बताइए, why did you make that decision? Is it something, I mean, what is it that made you make this? But the second thing I also noticed is that there's a certain sense of romance about those regions in your thinking and the way you address things. I mean, some of your predecessors have done it too. Akbar Ahmed, for example, comes to mind. Jamil Masood comes to mind. They also had that romance with the tribal areas and with that region. But is it just romance, or were you able to help them do something better? और इसके साथ जो मैं दो चीजें नोटिस करता हूँ, एक और बड़ी इम्पोर्टेंट चीज है कि you also mentioned the princely states and the merged areas. जरा इनके बारे में बताएं कि ये princely states जो हमने जितनी जल्दी खत्म कर दिए, इसका कोई नेगेटिव इफेक्ट था या could we have handled that better? और जो merged area की हमने की है फाटा के साथ union, should it have been a separate province or should it have been a merge जैसे हमने अभी किया है? Was merger better for them or was separate province better for them? क्योंकि हम कहते तो रहते हैं पंजाब को तोड़ दो और बाकी provinces को तोड़ दो, which I think is a good idea. But आपका ख्याल है इन दो सवालों पे?
Sir, as far as your earlier question is concerned, why I lived in the hills and the mountains, I spent about 10 or 12 years in the tribal areas. Then I spent years in Chitral and Swat, and then Gilgit-Baltistan, and then Azad Kashmir. I just loved these areas. Number one, they are so different from the settled districts. And unfortunately, most of our bureaucrats, the senior ones in particular, reserve their talent for Lahore, Karachi, and Islamabad. It was always very difficult to get volunteers to be posted to Gilgit or to Chitral. Actually, when you went to Chitral as a deputy commissioner or even an assistant commissioner, the people would ask you, where did you go wrong? क्या गलती की कि आपको चित्राल भेज दिया? क्या गुनाह किया आपने? But for one, I just fell in love with all these areas, and I'm so grateful to these people, the tribesmen in particular, right from Bajawar to Waziristan. They maintain their relationship, they are respectful, they listen to you. They are a proud people. You can't ride roughshod over them. But if you were to become their friend, they'll do anything for you. And they have proved in blood what they did, what they could do and have done for Pakistan. Unfortunately, Pakistan has looked the other way most of the time. As far as Dir, Swat, and Chitral are concerned, again, fascinating people. The administration, before the merger, the administration in Dir was really not up to the mark. But in Swat, it was remarkable. Swat, the administration and the governance in Swat, and let me also say in Bhavalpur, we've never seen this quality of governance of the old Wali of Swat. Miangul Janzeb, amazing person. And look at the quality of the schools, their buildings, their roads. I have mentioned somewhere in the book that there was an earthquake which struck Swat in 1991. And all the buildings which were built either by the British or by the Walis of Swat, Miangul Janzeb, all those buildings survived. But almost every building constructed after 1969, after the merger of Swat with Pakistan, almost all of them either collapsed or they were seriously damaged. And that's just one aspect of it. The more important aspect is that, there were just a few murders every year in Swat. Now there are a few murders every month in every police station. And no cases are settled. People are not punished. But the quality of the system of courts adjudication was fabulous during those times. And I think the people of Swat, we've dealt with them rather roughly. They needed something better, but that was not to be. So I think this is how things are. And I just hope and pray that as Dr. Edmonds of our principal in Edwards College would say in the morning assembly, oh God, oh Lord, give wisdom to the leaders of Pakistan.
Fascinating. Gee, let me take a few questions from the floor. Ji, Saidur Rahman Sahab. Saidur Rahman Sahab.
Sir, Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Ji.
Sir, मेरा इनसे question है. I'm Saidur Rahman, senior researcher and economist based in Islamabad. My question is that he was at the highest post of chief secretary in AJK, Gilgit and Sindh. So he was directly communicating with the government, chief ministers and others. So he has not given any overview by comparing that how was the responses of from different provinces or different government officials. So can you give some examples from that?
Yes, sir. I'll try and give some examples. Yes, you are right. It's at the level of the chief secretary that the political stream and the administrative stream merges. That's where the chief secretary heads the officialdom, and he deals with the chief minister and with the governor. Now, there is a difference actually. In the frontier province, KP, the culture is such that the chief ministers and the governors are more relaxed. They would listen to you. They might not agree with you, but it was rare when they did not agree with you. And this applied across the board, all political parties, at least till I was there. This, before 2004, 2005, it's a very relaxed sort of a arrangement over there. So whether it was Amir Haider of the ANP or Akram Durrani or Aftab Sherpa, Sardar Mehta, Mir Afzal Khan. And so these people would listen to you and you could say what you wanted to say. And it was rare when they did not agree with you. Now in the Punjab, to some extent, and Sindh to a very large extent, they weren't bothered about your views. For example, when this 12th of May 2007, there were a number of meetings held before the 12th on how to deal with it. And I realized that even when some officer would say something, he was snubbed. Senior people, grade 21 people in the police and in the administration, they were snubbed by the political leadership in Sindh. It's also very difficult to speak one mind in Islamabad later, not in the earlier days. And then in Punjab, I've not really served in the Punjab, but again, there were some very, very fine people. Actually, I had a lot of interaction with, let's say, Shahbaz Sharif Saab, and I thought, I said many things to him regarding water and power and all these issues, and he would listen. And but there were other people in Islamabad, in the water and power, who would just not bother about that. So I think there is a difference. But Saidur Rahman Saab, to answer, the short answer to your question is that it's not a uniform sort of a response. There are people who encourage you to speak. And amazingly, you might be surprised. The military rulers, General Musharraf, for instance, and General Fazl Haq, and General Ziaul Haq, they would listen to you. You could say what you wanted to say to them. But that doesn't happen very often with the politicians.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
We have now Mazullah Khan. Mazullah Khan.
Assalamu alaikum, Durrani Sahab. This is Dr. Mazullah from School of Management Sciences, Ghulam Isa Khan Institute. I read your book actually, and my favorite is chapter number 1, where you told us some stories. I really like those stories. My question is about state-owned enterprises, and you led actually 2 of them, WABDA and actually the power part of it, and then Pakistan Railways. The cumulative losses in 2019 were 143 billion rupees, and it is actually very, very huge burden on the taxpayer. What do you think should be the solution? In your opinion, what really worked for you while working with those institutions, and what did not work? And do you think as a public policy, for example, let's say, just to take advantage of the presence of Dr. Nadeem al-Haque, who is expert in this area, is it prudent, for example, let's say, to continue with these institutions, or should we divert all these resources somewhere else and, for example, let's say, privatize these institutions? Because we have given it enough time, and in my opinion, spending more money and, for example, let's say, making good for their losses would not be a good idea, in my opinion. How do you respond to that, sir?
Abdullah Khan, I couldn't agree more with you. The government has made a royal mess of the power sector in Pakistan, and this continues for the last 30 or 35 years. Before that, power sector was in a better shape. In the right up to the end of the 1980s and earlier part of 1990, power sector was in a much better shape. But the last 30 years have been an absolute disaster. And why the government does not want to privatize, or even better, lease out for 15 or 20 years the discos, or many feeders in the discos, I don't know. I think the Ministry of Privatization is fast asleep, and it has been, it is in a coma, it's comatose for the past 30 years. And I'm just amazed, or at least for the past 20 years, and I'm just amazed why they are not privatizing the power sector. You know, this 1.5 billion rupees loss per day is unbearable. And they'll have to do something about it. They should start privatizing, because with 22 million consumers, power consumers in Pakistan, and with the sort of structure that we have, it's not easy to save the money. So I think they'll have to do a lot more for the Karachi steel mill. It's unfortunate that they haven't been able to privatize the Karachi steel mill. They were biased for that. The railway has many problems, and it could do a much better job. But then again, it's for the government and the rulers to take that decision. But I agree with you. There are solutions to these issues.
Farid Rahman Sahab. Farid Rahman Sahab. Farid Sahab. Farid Sahab can't seem to unmute his mic. Okay, Prorector Sahab. Prorector. Prorector. No? Okay, ji. Jamiluddin Nabi Sahab.
Right, thank you. Assalamu alaikum ji. So this is Jamilun Nabi from University of Wasser. Thank you very much. It's really a delight to hear, your experiences as a very seasoned bureaucrat, and I can understand कि आपने जो pessimism की थोड़ी बात की है, that speaks of the courage initially that you were addressing to. So you have the courage to speak the truth, and maybe that is the reason that you are a bit pessimistic. सर मेरा सवाल आपसे ये है कि मुख्तलिफ फोरम्स के ऊपर हम बात करते हैं, और पाकिस्तान is in a mess. I mean to say, there are so many problems, and at times we cannot prioritize what is our biggest problem. सर आपकी राय में हमारी टॉप 3 प्रॉब्लम्स क्या है? मैं 4-5 नाम बता देता हूँ, शायद आपके लिए जरा आसानी हो जाए. Is it our population? Is it the courage you are addressing to? Is it corruption? Is it illiteracy? What are the top 3 problems of Pakistan, sir? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jamil Nabi. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind what the top 3 problems are. And since you did mention the courage part of it, which is really complementary to bureaucracy, I don't think it's possible for a bureaucrat, especially at the senior level, to function effectively without courage. As I said earlier, intellect, there are far too many people who could guide you with just the right solutions. You know these solutions anyway, but it's very important to be able to speak your mind up to the leadership. And very often the leadership has their personal agenda. And I've seen it for 40 years now. So courage is important. But as far as other issues are concerned, I feel that one of the main issues is the literacy ratio. Bangladesh is now approaching 85% literacy ratio. States like Kerala state in India, way back in the early 60s, had almost a 90% literacy ratio. You can't go anywhere, you can't develop, you can't step into the 21st century when you are still stuck in the 16th century as far as literacy is concerned. And you should have proper literacy. It's not the sort of a literacy that you can just write your name or read a sentence. That's not literacy. Literacy is more than that. So I think I would place my finger, first of all, on a zero growth rate of population. I think 220 million is quite enough, because if the present population growth rate rises, maybe in 30 years, we'll be 350 million. And look at the problems today. You know, look at, even though the economy is not doing that well, look at the number of cars. You can't travel on the roads at all these days. So population certainly is a must. You know, the green areas have to survive, but with the population growth rate of adding 5 million people every year to our population, where is the green areas are just going to turn into the brown areas, the built up areas, the roads, whatever. So I feel after the courage and integrity in the politicians and the bureaucrats, which of course is number one, my second priority would be coming down to a zero rate of growth population, you know, a fertility ratio of 2.1 per woman per husband and wife. 2.1 is the rate which would sustain this population. And thirdly, it's literacy. I would also add a fourth one. You know, we have 200 universities, and most of them are general conventional universities teaching languages and teaching humanities. I think many of these universities should be converted into vocational and technical training institutes. There's so many jobs available all over the world for them. And by putting these people, getting them through their BAs and MAs and whatever, you know, we are just adding to their burden, the burden of their families. People study for 16 years and get a master's and then cannot get a job. So, and this year, I believe 16 new universities are going to be established in Pakistan. This is not fair to the people of Pakistan. I think we should convert a large number of these existing universities into technical training colleges at diploma level. And at least those people would be able to make a living. So Dr. Jamil Nabi, these are my priorities.
Farid Rahman Saab, can you speak? Nope. Dr. Fawad.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can. Go ahead.
Dr. Saab, Assalamu alaikum. Good to see you after some time. And it's lovely to hear Shakil Durrani to hear about his book. I had the good fortune of having a look at the book when it was still being a work in progress, and I've been fascinated by it. But I would like to say something about Shakil Durrani, the man who wrote the book, because it comes out in his writing, his frankness, his honesty, integrity, and his the way he looks at the world and his perspective. Shakil is basically, to my mind, a romantic. And this comes out in his book, and it also comes out in many, many things that he's done and he's achieved. And I'll give you some examples. when we were working together in the frontier, I used to visit many, in my position, I used to visit many of these rest houses. And invariably in the rest houses, I saw a plaque and an antique gun, and it would say presented by Shakil Durrani. Or I would see an old, a nice picture hanging on the wall of the rest house. Now, while the other, I would say, people occupying the rest houses were sort of taking all the little things away from the rest houses, like antique guns and furniture and carpets. Shakil was there to contribute. And I was very much impressed by the fact. And I mentioned to him, I said, look, you spend a lot of time trying to build up and to contribute to things you see wrong and so on. The other thing is that he has done a lot of work for wildlife. In Chitral, for example, he started the bounty program to save the markhor and the snow leopard. It comes out a little bit in the book, but he was mainly sort of responsible for setting that up. And we see now how the snow leopard and the markhor has been protected. He is very fond of shooting. He was very fond of shooting. And he would go and shoot. But now he's a conservationalist. He goes around for shikar regularly. He was to Sindh and to other places around. But he sees the birds and he seldom makes a shot. So I think in the context of the book has also to be seen in the context of the man. And perhaps, this is relevant to this discussion. Thank you.
Right, sir, thank you very much. I think it's really added a dimension to this discussion. Thank you very much. Dr. Fawad Hussain, sir.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Ji, we can. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. This is Dr. Fawad from the Faculty of Computer Science and Engineering, Haque Institute. Sir, first of all, I would like to say it was a wonderful hearing your opinion and your experiences. And I couldn't agree on one of the things you said. You mentioned that there are 16 new universities being started. And I totally agree with you that perhaps the focus right now should be on getting the manpower that's required for industrialization. And that comes from developing polytechnic and training, vocational training institute, where we have the capable manpower. So I would like to know your opinion. I mean, you mentioned about the problems of the bureaucracy, and I would like to know what you think about maybe the problems arise because the bureaucracy was designed by the British and for the British. Perhaps the purpose was to, help them manage the subcontinent and not to let the subcontinent itself grow. You mentioned about, you said you couldn't speak to the higher ups. Perhaps the same things happen in China. They have the one-party policy and you can't speak a lot there either. However, one difference there with as opposed to us is that they have one vision, one agenda, and everybody is working towards that vision. So I would like to know, in your opinion, did you find that in our bureaucracy, there are many visions distributed, everybody is going on his or her way, and that is causing a lot of problems for the entire system as a whole? Thank you.
Thank you. I think from what I've read about China, there the political leadership, the Communist Party leadership, and the administrative cadres, they do debate every subject before they take a decision. And apparently, there is a free-ranging debate. People could speak their mind, and then it's on the basis of that consensus which develops that decisions are taken. In Pakistan, I think my feeling has been that the politicians in power, they have their priorities, and it's not very often that the views of the bureaucracy are incorporated. And actually, if someone raises an issue more than once, the politician in power, whether it's a minister or another person, they get irritated, because the focus is not on the long-term improvement. The focus is on being returned to power in the next elections. Now, coming back to this thing about the railways and the water and power, particularly the power sector, does anyone doubt? Do people not know what are the solutions? There are dozens and hundreds of very competent professionals as far as the power sector is concerned. But who is it that's going to take the decision on improving it, on privatizing it, on leasing it? That is not being done. Who is it that prevents this steel mills from being privatized? So I think it's important that whatever decision you take, whether it's the power sector or the single national curriculum, the views of those who know the subject best must be incorporated. And especially what you spoke about, this other thing, the employment and unemployment. This new universities, general conventional universities would not do. As people have said earlier on, we need to focus on the technical education and on the polytechnics. So that is my view as far as these two subjects are concerned.
Thank you. Babar Ali Saab. Babar Ali.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm very happy to be listening to Mr. Shakil Durrani, and I must compliment Dr. Nadeem Haque for facilitating this launch of the book. I read the book cover to cover. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it's a must reading for any new person joining the administrative staff service, because he covers his own career. Not only that, but he also shares his knowledge and his skill of solving problems, especially in the frontier region, and especially people who do not belong to that area and who have an opportunity to serve in KPK should read this book, because you learn a hell of a lot of how to deal with the people, how to respect them, how to interact with them. And of course, his career has been without any, it's been a career with total success, and nobody could point a finger at him for anything wrong that could have happened. My own feeling is that what is wrong with Pakistan today is that most of our politicians have parachuted from the top. Very few have grown from the bottom up. And there is so much money that is spent in getting elected, because the first attempt of these politicians is to really recover their investment and add something more for the next election. If you have elections which cost money, then you cannot have real democracy. You have to have people who really truly represent the sentiment of the people at the ground, at the grassroots, which is not happening. But coming back to the book, I think it's a tremendous contribution to people who would like to understand how a good bureaucrat works, how he led a life with total integrity. And I think it should be a role model for our young bureaucrats to emulate him. Thank you very much, Shakil, for this excellent work that you've done, and Nadeem Haque for giving us an opportunity to learn from him.
Thank you, sir. Greatly honored, sir, by your words. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That was Babar Ali, the legendary Babar Ali of many industrial fame, the founder of LUMS. Let's go to Shahid Mahmood.
Assalamu alaikum ji. Shakil Saab, this is Shahid Mahmood. I'm a research fellow at PIDE, and one of my research areas is incidentally happens to be erstwhile FATA. And I just have a few observations to share. You might agree or you might disagree with that. And I'll quickly go through those observations. One of the things that I learned from my work, there are only two power centers over there when it comes to erstwhile FATA. One, bureaucracy, and second, the army. There are no other ones. Politicians are least interested in development work and least interested in getting something developed over there. They just need they have little say in it. It's basically the bureaucracy and the army. Now, over time, a lot of money has flowed to those areas. If somebody says that there has been no money or no funds going there, that's wrong. A lot of money has gone over there, especially it has come from the donors, right? But there is no record of no central data repository, no statistics of those areas. And obviously this responsibility, given that chief secretary is all powerful, used to be and still is all powerful in that respect, in erstwhile FATA and former FATA. They should have been done long ago, but you couldn't even find, it's hard to find even data and proper statistics on it. There were off and on statistics, there were publications, but most of them I've found to be fake statistics and made up statistics. They are not true. Second, there is a lot of dependency over there, especially on donor money. And not all that money, whatever that is spent, some people benefit a lot from it, but it's only a tiny percentage. For example, and that's reflected if no money was going over there and nothing was going, if people say that there was no money over there, then a lot of people from FATA, they own a lot of things outside of FATA, in Peshawar, in Islamabad, in other cities. And I hope you would agree with that is the situation on ground. The colonial, it's the development model followed over there is the same colonial development model that Dr. Nadeem often talks about. It's all about building roads and it's all about building infrastructure. All the money goes in there, almost a huge chunk of that development budget, whatever development budget is over there, that goes towards the same infrastructure, the same roads, but there is nothing innovative about it. For example, let me just point out that the issue of property rights. Property rights are not very well defined. When I'm working with the KP government, and I keep asking this question and keep encountering this issue, that they want private sector to come in and invest. But why would the private sector come in when there are no well-defined property rights? The last settlement, for example, in Momand, where part of my family still lives, the last land settlement was carried out in 1923. And believe me, after that, there has been no settlement exercise over there. Now, and last but not least, there have been absolutely no studies whatsoever on all the money that has been spent over there over the years and what has been their outcome. So if you are talking about FATA and its poor development indicators, if there should have been an exercise, an evaluation exercise of where all the money went. So there has been no exercise like that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shahid Mahmood sir. You appear to have extensive knowledge about the tribal areas. I'm very happy to hear from you. You know, I need to point out, and I pointed it out at more than 2 places in my book, that there was one individual who passionately wanted FATA developed. He wanted roads onto the Durrani line. He set up industrial units in all 7 agencies. There were water supply schemes in Shalozan and Parachinar and in Bada and then Bajawad and South Waziristan. That man was Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. I've never come across another president or prime minister like Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who had the passion to develop tribal areas. And it would surprise you that I was a political agent in 1974. That was the first agency I did, 1974. It might surprise you to learn that the chief secretary, a remarkable man, Mr. Nasr Minallah, and General Nasirullah Babar, who was the Inspector General Frontier Corps, they would hold a meeting with every political agent once a week and check on the development. And unfortunately, after 1975, that development came to a standstill. And I've never seen any president, prime minister, minister as dedicated and devoted to the tribal areas as Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was. Remember, in those days, 1973, 74, he would visit every agency at least once a year. I mean, there's 7 agencies, and he would visit every agency once a year and would often spend overnight. He would be overnight in Parachinar or Razmak or Wana or Miran Shah. So unfortunately, that did not continue. And there was never any problem. There was no restraint on as far as money is concerned. And he said, anything that the political agent wants, we'll provide. That is when the first girls' schools started emerging in the tribal areas, 1974, 75. Now, as far as you mentioned the property rights, you're quite right. Except for parts of the Dawar Plains, Mirali area and Upper Kuram, no land settlement has taken place in the tribal areas. But by and large, they are pretty clear about who holds the property and its ancestral. Things could be improved, certainly. But the reason why outsiders are not investing in the tribal areas, even though a large number of the marble factories, the owners are from outside the old FATA areas. It is because of the lawlessness over there, especially over the last 40 years. The writ of the state, you don't find much writ of the state till about after 9/11. It was only after 9/11 that the writ of the state, and mind you, the writ of the state does not mean that you have police posts or frontier corps posts all over the places. Effective writ of the state means that you have people living over there in habitation, that there are schools and there are functioning hospitals, and the hospitals have doctors and medicines, and schools have books and teachers, and there's running water and electricity. This is the writ of the state, but most important of them all is that there is an system of adjudicating disputes. That is the writ of the state, and that never happened. Mr. Bhutto was trying to do it. His tenure was very short, he couldn't do it. But for the past, following him, I've rarely come across anyone who was keenly interested in the development of FATA. Yes, a number of roads have been developed, especially when General Kiani was the chief. A number of roads were developed, and schools have come up, cadet colleges have come up. But a lot more needs to be done. I think a lot more needs to be done, because FATA, like the KP province, is not self-sufficient in food. Less than a third, they grow less than a third of the food requirements in the KP, and I think less than a sixth, or maybe even less than that in the tribal areas. Some new development projects have been initiated: the Gomal Zam, the Kuramtangi Dam, Zam, the Moman Dam. These things would help. But I quite agree with you that the government must take a more focused view on this and place FATA higher on its agenda. Previously, the governor would look after the FATA. Now, that is no longer the case after the merger. But I would feel it might not be a bad idea if the governor, on behalf of the chief minister, takes a greater interest in the problems of FATA. But the adjudication of disputes, the civil disputes, the criminal cases, as long, I don't think the future bodes very well, because this system which has been introduced, transferring replicating the district courts, the kacheri into FATA, I think this would not do the tribesmen much good.
one last question before you go. आपने बड़ी बातें की about the civil service in Pakistan's development, etc., and the fact that civil servants must have courage and the ability to, and I agree with everything that you say. The one question that I have for you is about the changing role of civil service through your career. If you recall, क्या कहते हैं, before our time actually, the civil servant was really a researcher. अगर आप देखें जो इंडिया ऑफिस लाइब्रेरी में चीजें हैं, सिविल सर्वेंट्स ने बहुत सोशोलॉजिकल एम्पिरिकल रिसर्च की, हुकूमत को बताया. At the same time, the civil service was the custodian of process and the custodian of record keeping. ये कुछ आपको लगता है चेंज हुआ है आपकी लाइफ टाइम में कि has the civil service taken these two things by the same passion that your predecessors did, or has this denuded over time? Because मैं जब स्टाफ कॉलेज में पढ़ाने जाता हूँ या सिविल सर्विस एकेडमी में, तो I find कि वो नहीं अब नजर आता मुझे those kinds of people who will do this. They're more rulers than administrators, people who will make process, people who will keep records. What do you think about this?
So mine might be an unconventional view. I believe that the British administrators really cared about the people they were serving. The sacrifices which they made, the graveyards all over India, Pakistan are full of these people dying of malaria and all sorts of tropical diseases. And in the early part of my service, I came across lots and lots of people who had served with the British or had seen the British officers, and they were all praised for them. Our people, sorry to say, they're good people, but there are some very arrogant people in our service also, all services that is. And I feel that there's not enough accountability, day-to-day accountability of the bureaucracy in the districts. I mean, there is absolutely no reason why FIR is not lodged an hour or 2 hours after it's been reported. But someone must know if an FIR is not lodged, someone must pay for it. Then for the investigation to be completed and challan put in court, there are time limits that must be done. And similarly, as far as the deputy commissioner is concerned, it makes absolutely no sense for people to sit outside his office for 8 hours and then he says, okay, come the next day, and then again he works for 8 hours. And what he does after he sees the deputy commissioner or the SP or the DIG or the commissioner, they take his petition and mark it to an officer lower than them. And after a couple of days, that officer marks it to someone lower than him. So I think there must be greater accountability. And I really feel that the bureaucracy, whether it's the police, which of course is not a bureaucracy, but the police is only scared of either their IGP or the chief minister. And that's true of the commissioners and deputy commissioners also. That is when they are at their best. And I would want a greater sense of accountability. And it is not, it doesn't really matter. We come across this phrase quite often in the press that a murder takes place or a dacoity takes place or a kidnapping takes place, and the chief minister says that I've taken notice of it. It is not for you to take notice of it. It's not for the chief secretary or the IGP to take notice. It's for the SHO to take notice. It's for the DPO to take notice. And it's your duty to ensure that the case is finalized. Because after all, what is the touchstone of police competence? It is what is the rate of conviction after appeal. Now, if the rate of conviction after appeals in Pakistan is between 3 and 5%, quite obviously the security situation is unsatisfactory. And that happens also with all other services. Now, whether it's the municipality, you go to these hospitals, any hospital, including PIMS. There are some very good officers in PIMS. The head of the PIMS is a good chap from what I hear. But for ordinary person, you go to any hospital in the KP, including the Lady Reading, you suffer. And now, of course, I think lots of these responsibilities, obligations of the hospitals are under the Sehat card being given to the private sector. It has its advantages, but I would really caution against that. The district hospitals and the tertiary hospitals really need to be strengthened all across the country. So as far as the short answer to your question is that there are good officers and there are mediocre officers and there are poor officers. And they work according to what they feel is proper, or maybe even if they do not do that, they rise to their own levels of competence and incompetence. But by and large, I'm not very satisfied with the response or with the level of good governance which I should have thought must exist in a country in the 21st century. So with this level of bureaucracy and with these politicians, and you have seen how this country has suffered, I don't know how we walk into the middle of the 21st century.
Shakil sir, very quickly, what would the young Shakil Durrani have done if you were in Murray during this tragedy? What would you have done to prevent this great tragedy?
I think the AC and the deputy commissioner and the commissioner and indeed the provincial government, from what I hear in the press, they had abundant time. They were informed by the meteorological department that there's going to be heavy snows. So after that, you still allowed 130,000 vehicles to get into Murray. That was wrong. Once these people got stuck, then of course it became a very difficult exercise. But they should have been forewarned. Had they been forewarned, to forewarn is to forearm. They could have preempted much of what had happened. Of course, the extent of the problem, 140,000 vehicles, 130,000 vehicles in a heavy snow, I don't know how you manage that. But clearly there was a failure. And the local hoteliers and the businessmen fleecing the people. But I think the government could have done a lot more than had been done. There were difficulties, but I think more than the assistant commissioner, I would blame the people at the higher level, especially the provincial level. They should have taken greater stock of it, or better stock of it.
Thank you, Ji. Shakil Saab, I know it's getting late and you have to go, but there are two people who want to ask questions. Would you allow them, or should we close? पूछ ले चले जी सरदार अमीनुल्लाह साहब सरदार अमीनुल्लाह
साहब Assalamu alaikum. I think the moderator unmuted me instead of Sardar Aminullah Sahab. So this is Mazullah again, Durrani Sahab. 3 or 4 years ago, actually, I sent a proposal to Taimur Jagla when they came into power. And I proposed that we should set up, in my opinion, service centers, just like in Canada. So all the requests, like from government to public, all the services, they should be initiated to service centers. So in a way, you are creating a disconnect between the service receivers and the government officials. So that would, in my opinion, the best way to combat, for example, let's say corruption. And let's say if we define standard operating procedures and we also define, let's say, the time limits, that in how many, let's say, for example, let's say if I apply for a driver license in Canada, they tell me that, okay, you will get this driver license within 2 weeks. I do not interact with the government officials at all. So even, for example, let's say, even if I would like to expedite it, or let's say, get it to unfair means, there is no way I could do that. So then Taimur Jagla Sahab asked me actually to send their proposal to Kamran Bangash Sahab, who was working with, I think, some sort of like IT function with the Prime Minister's office. I think they should look into that proposal. In my opinion, it has very, very efficient solutions for all government to public services. Because in a way, we are creating a disconnect between the public and the service providers. For example, let's say, ensures efficient, let's say, like providing those services are like more efficient, and then by effectively creating this disconnect, actually we are discouraging corruption as well. What do you think, sir? Automation, is it not a solution, for example, for most of our problems?
I wouldn't know for certain, because if someone doesn't perform the duties manually, how would he do it better through automation? But let me say that what needs to be done is to reduce discretion. The exercise of discretion is an inverse proportion to the quality of governance. The greater the discretion, the poorer the governance. So you should have no discretion, whether it's a policeman or a tahsildar or anyone. You have to do that job, and you certainly don't have discretion. Why should there be a discretion with the Minister for Power to allow some people tubewell connection, but not others? Why should the Deputy Commissioner have the power to grant an arms license to someone and not to someone else? I mean, there must be some yardsticks, and there are yardsticks, but generally they are followed more in default. But the larger question is that everyone has to be answerable for every act that he does, and we are all public servants or were public servants, and whether we deny someone what he considers the right, we must be able to satisfy him. And if he cannot satisfy him, then I think there is the Prime Minister's portal, and people should be free to complain to him, and better still, complain to the Ombudsman. And the Ombudsman, of course, the good institution, they do their job well. So I think the exercise of discretion has to be reduced.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Can you hear me now, sir?
Yes, I can.
Thank you, sir. And assalamu alaikum, sir. And my regards to Nadeem Al-Aqab sahab also, sir, and Farid Rahman sahab also, sir. Sir, my comments on the book are as stated by the others also. I need not repeat those because about this wonderful book. Sir, you have written a lot about governance in Pakistan, in tribal areas and other parts of the country also, sir. Sir, me also as a retired civil servant, I'm disappointed like you. So how do you see the bureaucracy of this country for the service of Pakistan in the coming years with a frozen pen and a sort of rudderlessness in view of obvious messing up of the roles and responsibilities in the quarters of power in this country, sir? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Sardar Sahab. I have absolutely no doubts that if the civil servant, the bureaucrat, the DPO, the IG, if they have a sanctity of tenure, they'll be able to perform the duties much better and withstand any pressure which is applied on them. But, when you can remove the DPO just because some politician is not pleased with him, that's not fair. I think that's just not fair. So sanctity of tenure is absolutely important. And I also feel that in case there is the politician in power has a serious disagreement with, let's say, the secretary, the rules of business do take care of that. But if a bureaucrat, a federal secretary, or let's say in the case of the Punjab Higher Education Department, the 13 or 14 people who have been shifted in 1 year, anyone who's removed without completing his tenure, the case must go straight away to the provincial ombudsman, and the ombudsman must decide against the government or against the individual. This is just not possible. If there is sanctity of tenure, you could say no to everyone and nothing would happen. you know, the misgivings and this in services. But more than that, you know, when you come across decision makers who force their decision onto you, and they take faulty decisions and inappropriate decisions and downright illegal decisions, there must be an approach made to the ombudsman, maybe the district ombudsman at the lower level, district level, but to the provincial and the federal ombudsman. And he must be able to question the government of the day, why a federal secretary or a chairman or let's say an IG has been removed when for no fault of his, and the government must satisfy him. Once this is done, and ombudsman is giving that option, because ombudsman can decide this within a day or two, I have no doubts that the quality of administration and governance would improve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It has been an honor to have you at PIDE. You will appreciate this, that we at PIDE have been trying to make an effort, convince the Planning Commission that we need people like you to come and work at PIDE post-retirement for a year or two, to interface with our kids so that those people can also see and learn from your experience. And I wish this book had been written while you were at PIDE, because quite frankly, we need more such efforts to be made at the country's think tank. PIDE is not mine, PIDE is not yours, PIDE is the country's think tank. And we are trying very hard to make sure that people like yourself should come here, work here with our kids, you know, interface with them. That's all. Work, you guys don't need work, I know. But interface with our kids, talk to them, give them your wisdom. And I hope someday we'll be able to realize that. Meanwhile, Shakil Saab, engage with us, and help us understand this country better. Your book is a really a good addition to knowledge on Pakistan. Thank you very much.
Greatly honored, sir. Very kind of you for these exceptionally lavish words. And I'll be more than happy to work for you in any capacity. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, Shakil Saab. We'll call on you for that. Thank you. Khuda Hafiz.